So, my name is Aaron Reed. I am the Research and Evaluation Officer at the Skoll Foundation. And I'm joined here today by Mary Jo Cook, who works with Fairtrade USA. Fairtrade is one of our 87 Skoll social entrepreneurs that we fund and that we work with. So I'm thrilled to have her here today. A little bit about the Skoll Award. We invest, connect, and celebrate some of the organizations out there, the best organizations addressing the world's most pressing problems. And the way that we work with these organizations and the way that we invest in them comes in multiple forms. Certainly there's the award, and that comes with it a cash award. But in addition, it would be partnering them with folks like Sundance to help make sure that their story gets told around the world, or bringing them here so that they can connect with each other and connect with other like-minded individuals like yourselves. But then a third way in which we support them is in the realm of evaluation, which is where I work, where I come into play. That may take the form of answering a particular question that surpasses their capability to come up with that result. But it also could be helping them refine and improve the systems that they have internally to kind of gathering information about their efforts and to learn from that. And that's one of the ways that we've supported Fairtrade. And we're going to talk a little bit about Mary Jo and Fairtrade's experience with that effort and what they've learned from going through that experience. Also, some of the obstacles that they may have run up against and some of the real world learning that occurs there. We've divided today's conversation into two sections. So we'll start a bit with the planning side of things and how do you identify the outcomes and measures that you're going to be paying attention to and get to a solid kind of list of criteria that you're going to engage in. And then the second half is going to be making that real. How do you take that theory of change or that identification of outcomes and measure against it? So starting with the first, and at each section, I'll just say a few words before I allow Mary Jo to get up here and regale you with her stories. When it comes to the planning side of evaluation, inevitably there is some identification of the outcomes that you are going to be pursuing. It may be coming in the form of a theory of change, a logic model, log frame. It doesn't matter. It's an identification of the outcomes and the connection from your strategies through a expected causal chain to the long-term outcomes that you're hoping to see come about. The reason, the Skoll Foundation is a big supporter of the idea of a theory of change. In fact, that we work with our awardees now at the point of the application to help make sure that we understand their theory of change. We're investing in these organizations, and so we just want to have a shared understanding of what success looks like. The theory of change tends to be a very valuable tool for helping us understand that. But that identification of the connection of outcomes from strategies all the way out to long-term impact allows you to play out exactly when those outcomes are expected to occur as a time frame built into it, which is valuable because it helps ensure that we understand that these outcomes are going to come about during the first year of the grant and other ones are going to surpass maybe the lifetime of the initial award. But it also helps draw out the distinction between the outcomes that can be attributed to one organization's efforts and the outcomes that we're only going to be able to say that this organization contributed to. And that's an important conversation for a funder and a grantee to have with one another. One other point to make on the theory of change before I turn it over is that it's not just an evaluation tool. Certainly it helps identify those outcomes, but it's also a storytelling tool. And we're very big on storytelling. It's in Jeff's DNA. And I think that the identification of those outcomes is a necessary one for telling anybody's story of any organization. But it's also a strategy tool. It allows you to think through internally within an organization, how do you connect your work to those changes that you hope to see, and ensure that you're going about the strategies and taking the activities that you need to make the world the place that you've envisioned, or to identify outcomes that maybe you didn't think about when you first put together those strategies that you want to look at. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Mary Jo's experiences at Fairtrade, developing her theory of change, and some of the lessons that she's learned.
Thanks. Thank you.
Ooh.
It's missed a few. There we go. Hi. So we're really here to change capitalism so that it works better for everyone in the supply chain. We're here to revolutionize how businesses source, how consumers buy, and how farmers and workers produce and trade. And you want me to measure this? And that's really the challenge of some of this work and impact. As Erin said, we have no doubt that you have as much to teach us as we can share with you. So at any time, interrupt, ask questions, share ideas. This really should be more of a conversation than a presentation. To get us started, I do want to talk to you about, or show you one way that we try and create impact with our consumers and help them understand the differences their everyday purchases can make.
The very first thing you taught me was to be fair.
No cutting in line. Play by the rules. Play by the rules.
Don't pick on the little kids.
It's important. It's the right thing to do.
It helps create the world we want to live in.
Well, there's something I need to tell you.
Kids aren't the only ones that should be fair.
Mommies and daddies should be that way too.
Every time you go to the store, you have a chance to be fair. To do the right thing.
To make a difference in someone else's life.
It's easy.
It's not expensive. And it makes a huge difference. Just look for the Fair Trade certified label on products in the grocery store.
It means that farmers are getting a fair deal.
That their kids get to stay in school. That they can look forward to a brighter future. And we're getting great products that were grown with care. Now that's fair.
It's good for our family.
It's good for our neighborhood.
It's good for the whole world.
Buy fair, be fair. Visit befair.org to learn more.
I'm glad we had this talk.
So the idea with that public service announcement, which by the way is an example of a bunch of partnership and action. We met a producer at Sundance thanks to Skoll. We took him to Origin. He was inspired. He produced the commercial for free, and now we're running it as a PSA. So it's a pretty interesting way of trying to make fair trade accessible to people so that we can increase their awareness, interest, and purchases. So before I give you just a 2-second overview of how fair trade works, I want to do a little exercise. So stand up if you've heard of fair trade as a consumer. Okay, that is far better than my real awareness, so good for you. Now, so don't sit down yet. Stay standing if you think you really understand fair trade. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And stay standing if you regularly buy fair trade certified products. Whoa, it falls off the map. To the few of you who are still standing, you may get a fair trade pin at the end if you would like. And that demonstrates our problem. The biggest difference in this room was the awareness. No more challenges, sorry. If you want to invest in fair trade, then I would give you 2 pins. That demonstrates one of our big challenges in generating impact, because part of our model is getting consumers to know about and want to buy products. And part of that is not only making them aware, but having the products in distribution and easy to find in their local grocery stores. Okay, just take a step back. Since you guys all are aware of fair trade, the 2-second overview on how it works is really starting with farmers and workers who agree to produce against our standards. And probably the most unique thing about our standards is what we call economic and empowerment. So the economic part of our standard ensures transparency in contracting, access to finance. It also ensures something called a community development premium, which is relatively unique to fair trade. And those premiums are set by product category. It's about 20 cents a pound in coffee. It's $200 a metric ton in cocoa. On average, it's about 10 to 15% of the export price. Those premiums are paid by the buyer directly to the farmer. And that's where the second part of our model comes in, empowerment. So farmers democratically elect committees that then decide how to invest those premiums to solve their most pressing problems. For perspective, in 2013, farmers and workers earned about $40 million in those community development premiums. And I've been on coffee farms where they voted to invest them in cupping labs so that they can understand the quality of their beans. I've been on produce farms where workers have voted to invest those in scholarships, which is essentially bus fare and uniforms so they can keep kids in high school. Whoops. I've been on farms where the farmers have decided to invest in new washing techniques for their coffee to dramatically decrease the water use and improve environmental benefits. So it's a pretty unique model, that part of the fair trade standard. In addition, we have standards that speak to social and environmental, but those aren't really too different from anybody other's standards. No child labor, safe workplaces, things like that, good environmental practices. We then do a chain of custody audit across the supply chain, which ends up with purchase. Because at the end of the day, fair trade's a market-based program. If there's not a transaction, there's really not all that much benefit. Okay, so managing impact. This is what we were doing until I got involved with EHREN and Skoll. And it really, managing impact is sort of an overstatement of the situation. I would call it collecting data. And so what we were doing was we have been for years collecting a combination of quantitative and qualitative data across producer, business, and consumer. So for example, just because of the fact that we're a certification system with audits, we have enormous amounts of data. How many hectares under sustainable production? How many farmers employed in the venture? How much volume is produced, et cetera, et cetera. So we have this data. How much of it is really useful in helping us understand if we're driving the changes we want to make? We also have qualitative information, and this is really helpful. For every farmer in our system, we have a producer profile that explains a little bit about who they are, what they sell. This is a great tool for market access, because if someone says, you know, I'm really looking for this kind of coffee in this place, they can go to our website, or we can introduce them to farmers who might be able to meet their needs. On the business side, it's pretty thin in terms of measuring or capturing data around the impact we have. It's really more tracking. We track the number of companies we work with. We have over 700 business partners. We track the number of fair trade certified products. We track the kinds of stories businesses are telling, the kinds of press releases we're able to get. But this is probably the fuzziest part of where we're able to capture information. And then finally, on the consumer side, we track awareness. So among our target consumer, label recognition's about 62%. So that's why I said you guys did a little bit better. You're our super target. We also monitor and give people a chance to express their voice about fair trade in a variety of sites, Pinterest, social media, et cetera. So we have a lot of good data, but we don't really have an impact management system. And our challenge is to really redefine what it means to, what does impact mean, how do we measure it, and how do we communicate it in a way that creates value for everyone in the supply chain. If fair trade creates value for farmers and workers, but doesn't work for business, or is uninteresting to consumers, it will not work. And so our impact system has got to look across our supply chain and make sure there's impact for everyone involved. So EHREN spoke about the theory of change. So I'll tell you what we learned in doing our theory of change. The first thing was it's super hard to get really clear on the impacts your organization personally wants to enable. It's really easy, at least what we found, was to make the theory of change almost a vision for what you want the world to look like, as opposed to the things that you're going to actually try and work on. So for example, with farmers and workers, the ultimate outcome we're looking for, or the ultimate change, is sustainable livelihoods. And so we've decided the way we can contribute to that is enabling better access to markets, better market information. Enabling producers to have the skills they need to develop their organizations and develop their communities. On the business side, we've decided we absolutely have to play a role in value creation, which is essentially helping businesses understand why fair trade can be a good sourcing strategy, how it can manage their risk, and how it can help people engage their consumers. And so that's the activities that we'd work on with respect to business. And on the consumer side, activation is really about helping her understand why every purchase matters. It's making sure that the products she wants to buy are available in the places she shops at reasonable prices. Fair trade can't cause end price to the consumer to double, or it prices people out of the market. So our first learning was trying to be very strict with what are we going to enable as opposed to what do we wish the world would look like. The second learning, and I don't know if any of you would have a similar situation, but it was that we have tended to think of ourselves as a standard and certification company. And so therefore, we were expecting standards and certification to drive everything in the theory of change. Well, it's not really true. Oh my goodness, these colors show up terribly, don't they? Standards and certification are 2 of the 5 things that we really focus on. But the other thing is we have a whole host of producer service activities that may not be defined in the standard. So for example, we're often providing technical assistance projects to help increase quality or productivity, yet our standard doesn't overtly deal with quality and productivity. Or cultivating demand. That's a huge service that we provide because no demand, no transaction, no interest. And yet our standard doesn't have anything about, how much demand did you create last year. And then the last service is measuring impact, defining and measuring impact. And so for me, the learning here was as you develop a theory of change, thinking about the totality of your organizational activities and do those activities link to the changes you want to make. And if they don't, then either redefine your impact or stop the activity.
Just an additional point to make on that, and we do want to hear from you. That was a real request. Is that the points that I want to highlight a couple that Mary Jo made. In that going through the theory of change exercise, you're identifying the audiences that you're going to be working with, and then your measurement ends up being about the services in relation to those audiences. So really targeting in the measurement around what it is that you're going to do. I think there's a misnomer within the field that organizations should be responsible for assessing their impact on the longest term outcomes. I think that's part of the conversation, but the vast majority of the time that you should be spending on measurement, the vast majority of your activities should be on gathering information that you're going to use in order to do your work most effectively. That's where the theory of change comes in, because it identifies who are the audiences that you're going to serve, what are going to be the services that you're going to provide to them, what is the information that you need to know to ensure that you are following through on that chain. That ends up being, in most instances, the information that funders are looking for anyway. But there's I think a misnomer, a myth, that you just need to talk about the longest term outcome and then you're going to be satisfied that the conversation is done. But in fact, if you flip that, it almost always works more effectively. There are others out there that can be testing, because any one of those long-term outcomes almost inevitably involves other players, other actors. It's also farther removed. That's where the attribution-contribution conversation comes in. That somebody else may have already proved that that thing comes about if you've gotten to a midterm outcome. That if you can get it so far and you can make these behaviors start to come to fruition, that the conditional changes will start to occur as a result of those behaviors. You can prove your efforts this far, and there's research that's been done that can take the theory of change to the ultimate kind of outcome. So that's an important point. But talking a little bit more about the data collection side of things, this is moving into the kind of second segment of our conversation.
Yeah.
I like to think about...
Microphone?
Oh, sorry. Here we go.
No wanting to interrupt, but interrupting nevertheless.
Oh, please.
It's true that, let's say, the long term is a succession of short terms. Mm-hmm. So when it's quite important to measure impact, but I was just wondering if you have a solution for that impact measurement tool to actually assist you to prioritize the short-term actions that would get you there quicker. Because there is numerous list of things that are needed to be implemented in order to get from point A to point B. But let's say how to prioritize what to do first.
Yes, without a doubt. That was a bit of a softball for me with this slide. I think that the measurement conversation really involves, and there's so much jargon in the field of evaluation that I try to avoid using much of it. When I first came into the foundation, I've been there for about 2 years, we used impact as a term to mean a lot of different things. And when we talked about the measurement that we wanted to do with each of the organizations, we talked about it in a variety of different ways. I started to use this language of name, track, test, use as an alternative to get us back to just plain English and away from some of the jargon. I think most of what goes on within any kind of measurement cycle involves a bit of each of these. That first, you're identifying the outcomes that you're going to be paying attention to, doing the theory of change exercise as Mary Jo described, running through the gamut of articulating what are those outcomes, what are those indicators, just naming what success looks like. It's really important that that's a shared exercise as well between a funder and a grantee, between an organization and the audiences that you serve. With that in hand, with those outcomes identified, with those indicators identified, then you start to track certain elements. Certainly prioritization comes into play, and I'm going to address that in a second. But there's measurement that goes on. It's performance measurement. It's the day-to-day measurement to ensure that you're on track with your activities. This is the whole track piece. It doesn't have to be just outputs. We disparage this side of the work sometimes to say you're just counting people, there's no value in that. That's not what I'm saying. That there's performance measures that are the day-to-day work, key to you're doing your work most effectively, that any organization thrives on. That's the track piece. The test piece is filling in the gap, recognizing that a theory of change is made up of a bunch of kind of so-that statements, a bunch of if-then causal links. That if we deliver this outcome, then this following outcome is expected to occur. There's a series of assumptions that inevitably is made in your kind of description of how change happens when you go through that exercise. Every one of those if-then statements is an assumption on your part. Some of those assumptions have been proven already in social science, that if you generate this activity, if you generate these behaviors, these outcomes will occur as a result of those behaviors. There are going to be certain causal links in your theory of change that are either untested or just unique to your work. That this is the value add, that you're addressing this problem in a way that nobody else is addressing it. This is your unique innovation, your unique approach. It is therefore probably more incumbent on you to focus on those elements of your theory of change, those connections, than any other element within there. So that's part of the prioritization, is identifying what's already been tested versus what are the key assumptions that you're making that maybe nobody else has made. Finally, there's the use piece, the use component. Especially, this is a lesson that we at the foundation have learned, that you're collecting in a lot of information, data's getting generated, information's flowing in, that you have to make use of it or else you shouldn't be collecting it in the first place. So how do you cycle it in to change your behavior, to ensure that you're reflecting on the information that's coming in and altering your strategies and altering your services in response to that? One additional point that I wanted to make on prioritization, an easy kind of mnemonic, I guess that's not really a mnemonic, but a little guide that I like to use is that in making the prioritization, that once you have your whole theory of change in hand, there may be 100 outcomes that you've identified, each of them with some 5, 10 indicators that go along with it. It can be difficult to choose which of those measures you want to pay attention to, lest you fall into the trap of measuring 100,000 things and not using all of that. Communications, data, and proxy. This comes from results-based accountability. Communications means you have a number of different audiences, internal and external, that are going to be interested in the information that come back from your measurement. How many of those audiences would perk up if this information was shared with them? How many care about that particular indicator, that particular outcome? The multiple audiences means that it's got higher communications power, therefore probably of higher priority for you to pay attention to. Data power talks about the ease by which you can get that information. So is it going to be very expensive? Is it going to be very costly in terms of resources, in terms of time and effort? Is it something, on the other hand, that you already have available to you, that is part of an annual audit, that is part of a regular cycle of information coming into the organization so you can more easily get it? So second measure by which you can make that prioritization. The third is proxy. It's the recognition that when some indicators move, some indicators will pull along with them other indicators, that they will all move in the same direction. If in those situations, only measure one of the 5. Don't measure all 5 if you've proven that they go hand in hand and they move with one another. So between the 3 of them, indicators that are high in data power, high in communication power, and higher in proxy power will probably rise to the top of your list of ones to pay attention to in your measurement strategy. I'll turn it back over to Mary Jo to give you some kind of real-world examples.
So speaking of being overwhelmed by data, this is just one of the key performance indicator frameworks that we developed, because we also have one for business and we also have one for consumer. And rest assured, we're not going to go through it. But it's here to prove or demonstrate this idea that you want to look at the balance between efficient and insightful information. So efficient means it's really easy to get. I can probably get it in large quantities. That's the kind of stuff that comes out of our audit data. That may or may not be insightful. The most insightful things for us tend to be at the farmer and worker level, which is not efficient to get. So if we take a step back, what we did was we broke down sustainable livelihoods and said that's a function of income sustainability, community and individual well-being, empowerment, and environmental sustainability. Income sustainability is a function of a number of other things, like farmer revenue. Farmer revenue is a function of both revenue and cost of production. And then you finally get to the piece that's not even on the paper, which is, well, how are we going to measure revenue and how are we going to measure cost of production? And so what we're at this stage right now when we think about efficient versus insightful is, what is something that could teach us or might be a useful thing to share with people that's really easy to get? And so I told you a couple minutes ago we were getting about 50 data points off of our audit. Well, we've actually challenged ourselves on that, and we think there's really more like 25 that really matter, because for every one of those data points, you have to do something with it. It has to go to a computer system somewhere and have a way to spit back out and talk to other data points. It also poses this really interesting question, because if I was taking 50 data points from my audit, but I only am finding 25 of them useful, maybe there are 25 questions on the audit that I can get rid of. And so this is where then going back and checking how is your work process leading to the outcomes you want, and maybe being able to streamline the work process. At the other end of the scale, some of the more insightful stuff, one of the things we're trying to do is figure out how we more effectively reach farmers and workers and understand not what does the cooperative or the farm owner of a large farm think the change looks like, but what does the individual 2-hectare member of the cooperative or the worker on the large farm, how do they see that change? And I'm going to talk about more about that in just a second. The second lesson we had was to learn from others. There are so many people doing work in this space, and it's astounding how there's a big untapped opportunity for more systemization, more sharing, more doing things common. And so we talked with a number of groups, these are just a small number of the groups that are listed here, and tried to figure out, when possible, how to make our key performance indicators the same as other people's key performance indicators, so that over time you might not only be able to look at the change we're having, but you could compare it to other people who are trying to measure some of the same things. The second thing we did was we asked our partners. So this is an example of a number of business partners who are doing really interesting things, not just with fair trade, but in the general space. We also asked our producer partners. And sometimes you learned, like, the producer partners thought the most powerful impacts, not surprisingly, had to do with net income, revenue and cost of sustainable production, if you were that individual farmer. If you were a state owner, it was really about turnover and being able to provide more benefits to your farm workers. So really kind of listening and understanding what people in your ecosystem are looking for, and then having to be ruthlessly disciplined in which things you're going to go after. Because if I tried to meet the need of everybody who was asking for every piece of data, we'd go back to that chart I had a minute ago, and it would not be manageable. And then there's a lot of people who are doing certification. These are just a few of them. So what are they capturing? Where can we be common? Here's a perfect example. A number of folks have been working on living wage. How do you define it? And much more profound, how do you actually implement it in a way that is affordable? In some places, if you go to living wage, it'll price that farm so far out of the market that you've lost the market access. How do you get on a trajectory? So there's people that are working on that. We have no interest in reinventing that. As we learn from their learning, we would want to apply that into our standard system and into the kinds of impacts that we measure. Okay, the next lesson, and for me this is probably my favorite, is real-world pilots. So I'm pretty new to this space. I've only been in this sector for about 4 years. And my background prior to that was product innovation. And Sometimes this feels like a lot of framework as opposed to enough trying, especially as you're working on things like an impact system or a standard system. And so what I really fully believe, if you're going to create an impact management system, is that you have to hand in hand develop a framework, try some things, develop a framework, try some things, as opposed to develop a framework and then a year later when the framework's done, try something. They have to be more simultaneous. And so what we've done over the course of the last year is we have 10 pilots going across a number of categories in a number of countries. And they're really all designed to understand what are different ways of getting which information at a farmer and worker level. And so we know from the slide a couple slides back that we think income, we think sustainable livelihoods is the ultimate goal, but income sustainability is a big piece of that. So in each of these surveys, we asked questions around income sustainability. But we asked them slightly differently to try and see what might work better. In these surveys, we took 3 or 4 different approaches. In one case, we've been using SMS technology through LaborLink. LaborLink is owned by Good World Solutions, which is actually an independent nonprofit that Fairtrade USA owns. So we're a customer of that nonprofit, but they have customers as well. And this is out there just seeing what kind of information can you get if you train people in using their cell phones to answer certain questions. We've also experimented with an enumerator approach, where someone trusted in the village goes in and takes the questions and then puts them into something like an iPad. We've used some longer surveys. Those tend to be desired in places where there's concern about trust, but I also have concern the other way, which is the length of the survey, I think, can bias the results or can oftentimes in a personal situation make people feel like they should be answering questions in a certain way. And finally, we're experimenting with a new technology called Acopio. Acopio is a supply chain management tool that was developed for co-ops, so cooperatives could better manage their business. Well, it turns out not only does that tool have value in terms of business management, so that's why a cooperative would want to adopt it, but it can efficiently get us some of this data that we're looking for around revenue and cost of production all the way down to the farm level. So the key to this whole thing is to be doing your framework but experimenting, and what we're searching for is a way to have something that's systematic yet flexible. And so where we're kind of coming out on this is every survey we do going forward is going to have some questions around income sustainability, community well-being, and empowerment. We'll have a range of questions to choose from, and then within that you can pick the one that you think makes the most sense for your condition. And then we're leaving about half the survey to reflect something that may be of specific interest in that supply chain. So for example, in produce, a number of our customers want to understand if better training of farm workers can lead to better food safety outcomes. That would be totally irrelevant in coffee. But right now we are trying some trainings with farm workers on that topic, and so that'll be part of the survey question in that particular supply chain. And then finally, this one's probably a blinding glimpse of the obvious, but it's really a lot more work than you think. And 3 things that we personally learned about this is, the first is going broad and then focusing. So my guess is if you were to undertake something like this in your organization, you're going to find some people who are super practical. And they're going to look at this and say, here's what we do today, here's the information that's available to collect, here's what's possible, and I'm going to use that to define my impact management system. Those people will be great implementers, and it's great to have their voice, but do not let them be there at the starting point or you will go too narrow. You'll have other people who are dreamers who will think about gosh, if I could measure this, that would be perfect. Well, that may not be measurable. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't think about it in your framework, because 2 years from now, maybe in fact it will be. That slide I showed you with all the levels of metrics we're going after, I'm only going to collect a fraction of that in the first year of this journey. But over time, we may find either that some of what we're collecting isn't really that useful, we should collect other things, or that some of the things we wish we could collect are now available just based on new things that have occurred in the field. So that's the challenge here. Give yourself the space to go broad and then be really harsh on yourself in terms of what are the few things you want to do to get started. The second thing we learned, and I'm sorry if this offends any consultants in the room, but consulting does not equal capacity. So we had a small number of people who could work on impact. And so we thought, well, if we hire some consultants, that like doubles the number of people. No, it doesn't. It hopefully gives you a lot of insight and knowledge that you might not have otherwise to complement what you're doing. But consulting has to be a partnership in which you're managing the consultant and they're helping you with things, but it doesn't double your capacity. That was a huge learning for us, like how much work it was to work effectively with consultants. And the last thing, and I would love one of you to prove me wrong, but we were not able to find a one-stop shop. So when we thought about who to work with, it turns out that we worked with a group based in Northern California called SVT, who was really good at helping us think about our theory of change, stretching our thinking, saying, you really enable that? Do you? No, we're not so sure. They were really good about helping us think through what's the framework we're going to put in place? How are we going to communicate it? How are we going to sell it? Because eventually, to actually implement a lot of this, we're going to need additional funding for information tools, collection tools, things like that. They were great at that. When it came to the mechanics of which KPIs and how do you go and actually collect them efficiently, not so much. So then we found Sims, who's done a ton of work in this area and has been really helpful on that part, but I'm not sure Sims would have been the best choice for the first part. So my learning in this space, and again, I'd love to be proven wrong, was that it was hard to find someone who could help you with the whole process. And that's all I have to say. So at the end of the day, we want to revolutionize how businesses source, consumers buy, and farmers and workers produce and trade. And we got to be able to measure it. Thank you.
So a little less interactive than we hoped, but why don't we've got about 15 minutes left. Why don't we reserve this time for our Q&A, especially for Mary Jo. I'm happy to answer questions as well. We can pass the mic around up here.
My question has kind of two components to it. The first is, how do you keep measuring impact from interfering with the overall mission and daily operations of the organization? And to follow up on that, how do you encourage creativity and risk-taking among entrepreneurs and other companies while still focusing on metrics and impact?
That's a great question. So part of it, my initial response is, if you're measuring something that you're calling, if measurement of impact seems somehow different from your day-to-day operations, then it's probably the wrong thing that you're measuring. And I worry to a certain extent that relates to my point that I made earlier about the measurement for fundraising being different than measurement for effective operations. And the sector sometimes creates a dichotomy that shouldn't be there. I think that we need to do a better job of aligning those, funders and grantees both, where we're talking about success in the same way, and that the measurement that you're doing in terms of performance measures connects well to the fundraising conversation and understanding of impact. You had a second point about creativity and risk-taking. I think that in terms of measurement, I actually wrote something for the Skoll World Forum online site last year around this, that there's a number of questions that should be described in any measurement strategy. What did you do? How well did you do it? What difference did you make? But those are insufficient. That talks about performance measurement and talks about outcomes. But I would also say, like, what else could you do? So, for instance, another one of our organizations in our portfolio, 1 Acre Fund, is just one of many that has an entire strategy of testing and learning. Things that are not part of their core strategy, but where they're experimenting to determine whether or not it is something that they might want to add into their core activities in the future. I think that is something all of us should have. I work in Palo Alto, and the Silicon Valley has taught us a lot about the testing and innovating on the side in order to inform our core strategies. The 80-20 rule of dividing out most of your efforts come from that one innovative side of your work. So I'm a huge supporter of it. I think it needs to be part and parcel of your measurement approach. Do you want to add some points?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only other thing I might add is that another lesson we've learned is that really being serious about an impact management system is a change management process. And so I don't really have a change management person. You know, we're trying to figure out this as we go along, but it really should be just embedded into people's everyday work. And then on the creativity side, for me, it's about what's the principle, and then there's lots of ways to go about it. So I'll give you 2 examples. I talked a lot about those community development premiums that farmers earn. Well, there's a lot of question around, well, how do you think about setting those? So we experimented with a different way of setting them in produce. It's still a dollar amount, but in some cases, it was set so that a buyer and a farm could understand that in general it should be 5 to 10% of export price. And so they got a sense, okay, how much is it going to cost me if I do fair trade? And if the price changes dramatically, will you be able to adjust that on a year-to-year basis so that the stuff doesn't become, unaffordable? So that would be a case of experimenting with something, but it's within the context of the principles of what we're trying to do. And the same thing with these surveys. Like, we want to be able to reach farmer and worker. Now, how do we experiment with that? I had never heard of a Copio 6 months ago, right? And now we're working with them on 5 farms in Peru. So, because again, it's all about, this is the principle, this is what I'm trying to achieve, and then there's like 4, 5, 6 ways we can go about it.
Other questions?
So we are a development organization focused, our funding source was largely unrestricted funding for a long time. We're moving into public-private, so we're starting to get more attention by M&E. We're collecting a lot of data. Originally it was farmers, numbers of farmers, and numbers of animals provided. So it's agriculture with livestock focus. So pretty simplistic measures. So we're trying to move into more sophisticated measurements. So we've got a lot of data. So how do you have any sort of good thoughts on sort of how organizations use? I like that simple language around using the data. Do you see organizations that really have a good forum for using the data to establish best practices and really leverage it back in the field? We've got hundreds of projects going around in 30 countries around the world.
Do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I mean, I guess some of it becomes like, the first obvious question is like, to what end? So having this many farmers, like, to what end? And so if you can kind of answer that next question, that may help figure out, information instead of data, information that's more helpful. I think for us, this is the tension we've found. For years and years and years, well, we haven't been around that long, but for as long as we've been around, we've been measuring volume of product produced. How many pounds of coffee? And then how much of that was sold as fair trade, and then how much of that was earned back in community development premiums, right? And so that's pretty simple for me to go to people and say, this year people earned an additional $40 million in premiums, and then I can back it up with, about half of that was spent on projects to improve lives, about a quarter on quality improvement, quality and productivity, and about a quarter on environmental. And then I can back it up with a few stories, like here's what they did in Mexico and blah, blah. The danger with that, so that's a great way to simplify a big part of our story. The danger with that is it can dumb down fair trade as if that's the only benefit we're having. And the even bigger danger is that we think we reach about 1.5 million farmers. So 40 million divided by 1.5 is $25? I don't know, you do the math. It's a really low number. And so if that's all you were doing, it would be like, well, save everybody the trouble and just mail out checks, and be done with it. So I think I don't have a great answer other than like if you can get a few things that really help demonstrate some of the change, but then figure out, and this is what we're trying to figure out, how do you put that in a context where it's simple but not dumb? Or it doesn't make it sound like, oh, fair trade is just this $40 million in premiums. Okay, let's go on to the next thing.
I would just add that, and it's going to be still conceptual, but we can drill down with more information. But use cases, it really is about to what end, and I would describe maybe at least 3 kind of what ends to consider when you're talking about use. That there's the improved side of things, of like how do you become more efficient in your efforts? How do you adjust your efforts based on evidence-based decision making? And so cycling that information into your organization in order to revise your strategies would be one category. I still, and I'll echo the point I made earlier, think that should be the bulk of your measurement time and energy should be spent there. The next piece would be about the proof side of things, validating to ensure that you are delivering on the outcomes that you are trying to bring about, especially the proximate outcomes, especially the ones that are more attributable to your efforts. Because those are, if they change, it's on you. If they don't change, it's on you. But then there's probably a third category, which relates back to the improvement side, but also to the proof side, which is proving that you've improved. That's something that funders are going to be interested in just as much, I've found, as the proving the outcome side. That you need to be able to prove that you're achieving them, but sometimes we don't know that. We're testing new strategies, we don't know for sure yet. Proving that you've got an evidence-based approach to thinking about your work and that you are evolving your strategies based on information that's flowing in is a really valuable conversation that funders are going to be interested in.
I actually have a question for the audience, and then I'll go back to you, which is, like, what metrics have you guys found, or what ways of talking about impact have you found really successful? So I'm going to pick on you, because I was at your session yesterday when you talked about how you've gotten people to invest enormous amounts of money that make me so envious in scaling what you're doing with teachers. And my guess is, you know, it wasn't just like, you know, we're really nice people, trust us. You must have had some impact metrics that allowed you to do that. So, like, what are you using?
Thanks for asking, first of all.
Tell that group who you are in your organization.
So I'm Tracy Kramer, and I'm with the New Teacher Center. We're based in Santa Cruz, California, and we work across the country in the United States to, you know, make sure that new teachers get better faster and stick around and actually know how to teach. So, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, part of it maybe has to do with character and people like us. But I think that the other part of it is that we worked really hard on putting together a theory of action. And we've got a model that I think people really trust and really believe in. And that theory of action really gets specific about, like, the inputs and the outputs and the conditions for success and all of that. And so some of the performance metrics and the way that we measure impact has to do with teacher retention. And we're starting to get better at you know, making the connection between the work that we're doing and student achievement. It's a little bit tougher. It's one of those sort of like longer term goals, but we do have some things that are kind of in place that might get us there. We do have some indications about that, though, but I think it really has to do with having this really solid model described through a theory of action.
Exactly.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and then, sorry.
Hi, I'm Beatrice Halpap. I'm working for a program that supports research and training in tropical disease, and this is based in WHON, the World Health Organization, but it's co-sponsored by different UN institutions. And we have actually developed, based on a board who is composed of most of the donors, request to measure impact. So we have developed theory of change, result chain, and all the framework. And what has been successful in this is really the process, because we've, like what you say in your lessons learned, we have consulted all the co-sponsors to see how do they do it in UNDP, in the World Bank, in UNICEF, how other even agencies have done it in the research area, etc. Then we have engaged the stakeholders that are working with us, so whether these are the grantees to whom we give grants, but also the donors. And actually we really define the matrix of indicators at the end together also with the donors. And this is this consultation, and that was really rich, and that helped to get something, like you say, not plenty, but just what matters. So we came up with about 10 to 15 key performance indicators that we're committed to look at, but we are also, it's another lesson learned, making sure that we are looking at our indicators with a bit of a distance, because sometimes they drive you somewhere unexpectedly, and you have to be able to react. So that's a bit, I think a real lesson learned is this process of consultation.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk. My name's Mark. I'm a strategy consultant, and I can guarantee that you're correct in that we do not build capacity. Very, very true. And so we work in social impact and growth in both charities and then the donor side as well. But one of the extra things I do is that I'm an assistant editor on a blog that's all focused on data. It's called Markets for Good. And I kind of approaching it from that angle, my question, what I'm really interested in to know a bit more about is how you work with organizations doing the similar things that you do, and then how you really encourage them to use similar data, the point that you mentioned very specifically. How is that going? How do they reply to that?
Yeah, There's a lot more work to be done, truth be told. I mean, there are some groups like ISEAL, which tries to bring together standard and certification bodies to use similar things, and we've reviewed their framework and have taken some of it where it's relevant. There are groups like Sustainable Food Labs, which is a little bit more on the industry side, that do similar things. I don't have a great answer in the case of impact for how to do that. I mean, one dream would be to say, you know what, we're going to create a data management system that none of us nonprofits could afford, and it's going to have a common chassis that's going to require all these individual pieces to go in a similar way, and then you can customize at the end. So Rainforest cares deeply about the environment. They can have more profound environmental metrics on there than we might ask or want to get, and we can have more comprehensive empowerment metrics. So that would be the vision. There's venues where a lot of that is talked, and I'm not sure how to actually enable it. I mean, I'll give you a really different example that's off of impact, but just to hopefully show the point. So there is another certifier, and I don't think I can publicly disclose their name right now, but we have a memorandum of understanding with them, because if you do this Venn diagram, in the intersection of my circle, we have equivalent standards and compliance criteria. They may not be exact, but they're conceptually very equivalent. And then on one tail, we focus a lot on this economic and empowerment, and they focus on something else. Well, we've said this is silly. We work in a bunch of the same commodities, and we could actually take all of this and do one audit where the core is audited once, and then the same auditor audits each of our tails. It would be cheaper for the producer, which means it ultimately saves money throughout the entire supply chain, and would also let a producer get 2 certifications at once, depending on what his or her market partners want. So I am deeply hoping that we will have something like that being tested this summer. Depends how fast we can get there in the crop cycle, but that's a place where we've been able to define value for enough players to bring us together and do it. In the impact space, I'm not sure why we haven't been able to. Everybody gets the value of being common, but no one's taking charge of saying, how would you actually do this?
Can I ask, do you think there's almost would there be a fear that if you have this data, then it makes it very clear which organizations are, perhaps where money should be going?
Could be.
Are people asking that question to you? Is there a fear there, or are people very happy to say, yes, let it show the quality of our program as opposed to anything else?
Yeah, that could be. I think it's more, I mean, how many of you work effectively with 5 other or 10 other organizations that you don't own? And then, okay, great, so maybe you can come teach us how to do that. And then how many of you do that? Like in the for-profit space, that would be called merger and acquisition, or there would be tools to actually force these combinations. And so I'm not trying to blow off the question. I've been here in this world for about 4 years, and it stymies me. And I actually think that it has to be something where either a funder or a project that's bigger than any one nonprofit forces that kind of collaboration, and that's where my mind goes to. Maybe there will be a way down the road of sharing some IT infrastructure that none of us nonprofits would be able to afford on our own. Yeah. I mean, it's a really fair question. I wish I had a better answer. Yeah.
I'm with the Forest Stewardship Council, so
yes.
I live and breathe this world too, and I think that ISEAL is the right place for it to happen. And I think there are 2 ways that we can move closer to that. One is sort of bottom up from the members of ISEAL saying, we need this.
Yeah.
We're not just focus on our standards and our theory of change, but actually the tools that we all need in common to advance our mutual agenda. But I also think that we need to get ISEAL to be thinking about it as their next generation of innovation, because there's going to be they probably haven't approached it because other things have been sexier to fund. Now is the time, I think, to really put some pressure on them. And there's a meeting coming up.
Yeah, well, and actually I was at ISEAL's offices on Monday when I came here in London, and I think they are absolutely thinking the same way. And so now it's a matter of creating the venue for implementing something like that and allocating the resources. Like if I'm going to play on my own, that's one set of resource. If I'm going to play with someone else over the long time, that should save me time and energy, but it's a body that I have to send to go play with the other people. So I think those are some of the hurdles, but I couldn't agree with you more that ISEAL could be the venue. Will it is still an open question, yeah.
Thanks. Really interesting stuff. I'm just curious, and Erin, this might be more for you, Mary Jo, I don't know, or maybe not, but I was in the previous session about mapping the genome of social impact earlier today, and I'm curious, from the perspective of someone who lives and breathes and thinks about this stuff, how that concept of impact tracking, evaluation, management intersects with, you take it philosophically or take it practically, but what's your reaction?
So I do think it actually connects to that last question, or the second to last question, or the connected questions. I think that there is, one, we have to differentiate, and Jason in the last session made this point, we have to differentiate between what is customized, necessarily customized for each organization, and what do we want to look across, and how do we want to look across organizations. And that relates to the performance measure side as well as, and then the long-term impact. Where you draw the line between where the customization stops and where the shared measurement begins is a really tricky line to draw. And I think there's danger sometimes in over-promising the opportunity for shared measurement. Even in the ISEAL example, there's a tightness of the organizations involved that's issue defined. And that comes with it its own gamut of challenges. When you go even beyond that one more narrowly defined bound to all issue areas and the comparability of this organization is better than that organization based on this objective measurement, trust us, we all want it. It would be a great thing to have. Even the organizations themselves would want it to be able to compare and learn from each other. So directionally, I agree. It's something we want. I'm not sure that we're ready to fully actualize that quite yet. And then this is probably the last one. We want to make sure we give you time to go to new theater.
This question, if we look also at the work of the B Lab, where they are trying to look at the certificate, would that also, it's maybe more process and these are key elements, maybe, but it still will be a bit in the same direction as the genome, or even would be coherent to what you've been saying?
Oh yeah, no, I think B Lab's doing great work. Obviously, because we're bringing them into the portfolio this year. But I think that they know where to draw the line between validating versus comparing.
But it's still very close.
It is.
I think we have a couple more minutes. We have till 4:15 if there's any other questions.
Oh, we did have till 4:15.
Yeah,
I thought it was till 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or we can go and have more time to talk. Go ahead.
Tapping on that, are you guys working with the B Analytics, and what is your experience? Because I'm from the BMW Foundation, and we're having a really hard time measuring our impact.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to work with the social report standard just to have a basis, because we work with individuals, and then they go out, and we don't how to go after them and see how is the impact. And so I would like to understand how is your feeling, and what is the B Analytics as a tool or as changement possibilities, because at the end, big corporate foundations, and we all want the same goal, and sometimes we're not talking to each other, and that's
I know. So they're brand new to the portfolio. I haven't been able to engage, and the analytics are evolving even as we speak, that they are different now than they were just a few months ago. So I can only say that much. I look forward to engaging further with them and working together with them to make them as valuable as they can be to the sector. This is a nut that we haven't cracked yet. And you can see by the variety of efforts that are going on to deal with it, whether it's mission measurement or B Lab or ISEAL, that the shared measurement idea is one that we all want to address. But it's one that we still have not yet addressed or found. I don't think the right answer has been provided that would serve all purposes yet. They're all customized based on a certain particular audience.
Anything
I'm
else?
sorry, I feel like I thwarted the conversation with my false.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have another question to you. It's better. Thank you. And well, we in the BMW Foundation, we are supporting the Sistema B, that's from the B Lab, the Latin American version. And when we started to research and see what do we want to, we tap onto so many different certifications and so many applications and assessments, and we even went and talked with some companies and said, like, how do you feel about filling up all these questionnaires? And so what is your feeling about that? Do you guys talk with each other? In Germany, there's all this bio thing going on, and there's like 5 types of bio or whatever labels, and for the consumer, it's super hard to see which one is the. So is there any bonding going on, talking with each other? I'm just curious about it.
No, it's a terrific question, and I'm going to give you a bipolar answer. So on the one hand, at least from a consumer confusion perspective, yes, it's confusing. And it's confusing because even things like organic, which have a very strict definition, well, some people don't like that definition because they wanted organic to also be the old organic where you had to treat people and animals well, and that has nothing to do with organic anymore. So it gets even complicated because even the labels themselves carry, I wish it would do this, but it only does that, some of that going on. At the same time, I think about 1.5 billion in US dollar sales, just in US, is about the sales of fair trade certified products. And like, what's the US economy? Trillion, is there a bigger number than trillion? It's like a really big number, so we're this. And so if you think about a system that needs massive innovation, if you try and go too common too fast, you potentially ruin this chance for innovation. And so I would actually rather have a little consumer confusion and too many labels if that means more innovation in the short term, and then over time maybe you see what shakes out. The flip side is you got to figure out where you can be common, what you were just saying a second ago, and where there makes sense to differentiate. And I think at least what I've seen in the nonprofit space is there seems to be a fair amount of differentiation for differentiation's sake. Someone has a new idea, they're going down this path, they're going to try it this way, which I actually have found more than I had seen when I came from the private sector. It's just an observation. And so what we're trying to do, and we're in the world of standards and certification, so this ISEAL comment is spot on, is work with peers in this same industry to figure out where can you make the standard common? Where can you make the compliance criteria common? Where can you make the audit process common? And what's happening is really it's more of a case-by-case basis. So for example, we're working with a company now where we might actually take their code of conduct and say, you know what, you can keep doing your code of conduct, but that'll get you 2/3 of the way to fair trade, and then we'll only audit the difference because we've checked your code of conduct and it's so much alike fair trade in this base area, and then we have to audit the difference. Or alternatively, you don't have to do your code of conduct, just do fair trade, it'll count for both. So those are the conversations we're increasingly having. That's why I gave you the example of the Venn diagram and doing that one joint audit. And I think it is coming in part because industry is saying, this is ridiculous. I'm working with 3 different auditors, and it's even worse because we're nonprofit, so we're supposed to all just want to get along. You know, they might not expect that of their for-profit supply chain, but they damn well expect it of their nonprofit suppliers. So I think it will happen, but I don't know. I think it's going to be a little bit sort of organic in terms of how it comes about. Yeah.
I work for a for-profit, and in recent years we have really tried to take a look at certification, CO2 measurements, labels, and everything. German initiatives, UK initiatives, and at one point we basically decided we need to develop something that first of all we have a control about, but also second of all really takes the entire value chain. So we developed a label for the planet impact of our products. It's called Eco Plus, and we can simply say this product has a better eco footprint than the same products of competitors by this amount. Very simple. The same we would like to do with the impact on people. And there we struggle because how do you measure impact on people? For instance, we work with the World Food Program. We improve the nutrition of around 15 million women and children across Africa and Asia. Now, that has a profound impact also later in their life. We don't have a way to measure it. Now we're talking to, and maybe this is a tip, we're talking to accountants, because according to Peter Bakker of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, accountants will save the world, because in the beginning you said we need to fix capitalism.
Yeah.
And fair trade is a result basically of failed capitalism.
Exactly.
Now, in order to fix it, because I do the reporting for us. I have a book of IFRS rules. It's 1,600 pages. So for financial stuff, we have arranged everything, right? Still virtual because we never see money, but they might help. And we're now engaging with them to develop metrics that you can actually report on that are also, because there must be some good in those financial things, because capitalism, I mean, it went through the roof the wrong way, but still. Yeah. So I saw, you made a whole list of the people you talked to, so I thought you might want to, include accountants.
That is a super interesting idea, and I almost brought this up as an example, but I didn't want to get off track. I don't know if any of you have heard of Sustainable Brands. It's a group that brings people together trying to embed sustainability into supply chains. It started out as kind of fringy little, and now there's like lots of really big companies involved. In fact, I think I drove the BMW electric while I was there. But and in fact, that's one of the topics, is how do you create a P&L for social work, for the kind of work we're doing, both environmental sustainability and social sustainability. And there is, I think, a groundswell on that. It's a combination of changing how P&Ls are created, like the current FASB systems, which don't cover any externalities really, but also thinking about how you would apply that same mentality to measuring sustainability. And so again, it's one of those things where there's lots of really good conversations, and it actually, your point is well taken. It might be worth just having a conversation with an accounting firm about something like this. For me, the question is, what was the tipping point that created FASB? You know what I mean? How do you go from the conversation to the will to actually make it happen, Well, okay, that's depressing. So let's try something else. But yeah.
If you want to move a mountain, with a good quote, if you want to move a mountain, you start with the little rocks on the side.
Yeah.
So just start with a conversation.
Yeah. No, it's great.
We need to do something.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, makes sense. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us.